Hi, I'm Avery Davidson. Thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, the only TV show bringing Louisiana farmers and consumers together every week. And what a wet week it's been and continues to be, as farmers, ranchers, and folks who live and work in rural areas wait for floodwaters to finally flow out of their homes and fields. A slow-moving low-pressure system set records for rainfall in both Monroe and Shreveport, according to the National Weather Service. Governor John Bel Edwards issued a statewide emergency declaration, and 23 Louisiana parishes are now federal disaster areas. That opens the door for aid from FEMA and the FSA. Governor Edwards toured the areas hardest hit, like Shreveport, Monroe, Franklinton and Washington Parish, and rural areas of Tangipahoa Parish, all places which saw upwards of 2 feet of rain fall in a 4-day period.
Obviously, this was a significant storm event, and it was statewide in its impact, and that's why there's been a statewide emergency declaration. I will tell you that we've got standing water and floodwaters in places where nobody who's presently living in Louisiana can remember those waters ever being before.
Heavy rains filled rivers and bayous, which is why backwater remains a problem for farmers who should be planting corn and ranchers who now have nowhere for their cattle to graze. My partner, TWILA's Kristen Oakes-White, has been following how this flood is impacting farmers and ranchers across the state. And Kristen, I understand even your husband's field is still covered with water.
I am standing here in Monterey, Louisiana, Avery, and as you can tell, it's extremely windy, and all of that wind is coming off of that front that brought all of that rain to North Louisiana. And here, this is my husband's soybean field. This field is covered in 6 to 8 inches of water. Monterey is about an hour south of Monroe and Rayville in those areas where they got so much rain. Here they only got about 10 inches of rain, but as you can see, that rain came so hard and so fast that the rain absolutely had nowhere to go, and so these fields are literally standing in water. Thankfully, they didn't have any corn planted, but that wasn't the case across the state. As Avery just mentioned, heavy downpours and unprecedented flooding across North Louisiana have farmers and ranchers across the state dealing with a familiar foe, the consequences of Mother Nature. TWILA's Carl Wiggers is in Richland Parish, where hundreds of acres of newly planted corn are drowning in a field of floodwater.
Richland Parish farmer Dustin Morris is chest deep in water. He's checking the depth of the floodwater at this power unit on the bank of the Beth River. Here you see what Morris had to do to save that power unit from being washed away. That's a massive spray rig pulling it out of the rushing waters.
It's a flood of epic proportions, it really is. All this is just from having so much rain at one time, it doesn't have a way out. And so I think that our communities are suffering more now than ever, more than any hurricane that I've ever seen in my lifetime, and more than in '91.
By boat, Morris's father-in-law, Congressman Ralph Abraham, gets a first-hand look at the damage caused by so much rain in a short amount of time.
I've been from certainly the northeast part of the state all the way down to the Florida parishes and some in between there, and I've seen devastation everywhere I've gone. I've seen more water in this event than I've ever seen as a Louisianian in my entire life.
While Abraham knows his votes in Washington, D.C. will help the farmers and ranchers in his district, the sandbags he's carrying now will do so much more.
Well, unfortunately, we have had loss of lives, and I can only imagine the damage of loss of livelihood when we start assessing and adding up those figures. It's going to be monumental.
From the air, you get a full view of the damage. Water covers the roots of trees in this orchard. Fields near Sterlington, covered entirely with water, sit next to houses where no one can live because the flood has taken them over. Even the house of God, this church, was not spared from the damage caused by rising waters. Despite the damage, Morris is prayerful and thankful.
You know, at this point in time, we just got to be patient and be thankful that we didn't plant the whole farm.
Morris had only planted 300 acres of this field before the rain started. He'll likely have to replant everything here once the water recedes.
This is minor in the big picture. There's people losing their homes. Our closest neighbor has 4 feet of water in their house right now. And so when you take that into perspective, having a few acres of corn underwater isn't nearly as bad as it could be.
All of our fields are completely submerged. I mean, very few fields that are actually left outside of the water. I mean, it's completely submerged.
Elliot Colvin is a farmer. His fields are also underwater, but he's thinking about his neighbors.
Farmers are the lifeblood of our community. Typically, they're the first people that are called. I mean, everybody knows a farmer in our area, in our rural areas. You know, and farmers are such a vital part of our local communities, and usually they know to lean on them first.
Just the first day, I got literally hundreds of calls from farmers, mostly, say, hey, I've got some farm hands that we can't get in the field. What can we do to help? We can bring trucks, we can bring tractors, we can bring trailers, and we just want to be part of the solution. And that's what, again, makes me very proud to live right here in Louisiana.
Growing up in this part of the state, I've driven these roads my entire life, and I've never seen anything quite like it myself. I've got friends with homes that are underwater. I've got family that's putting poly pipe and sandbags around their own homes, trying to protect it from backwater and flooding waters, and it really just breaks your heart to see this kind of damage, this kind of a storm hit your hometown.
Carl, you're right. It is truly unreal to see that much water in one place at one time. Carl Wiggers, thanks. Congressman Abraham said a day after the floodwater started to rise, the Farm Service Agency had boots on the ground in Richland Parish assessing the damage. And if you have damage on your farm or your area or home, you'd like more information, contact your local FSA office or visit our website at twilatv.org. Well, if you travel further west along the I-20 corridor, the story is the same for farmers and cattlemen in northwest Louisiana. In just 2 days, more than 20 inches of rain devastated parts of Caddo, Bossier, and Red River parishes. The flood water turned roadways into rivers and pastures into swamps. More than 10,000 head of cattle were relocated to higher ground as fields and pastures quickly went underwater. South of Shreveport at Frierson Plantation, floodwaters drowned more than 400 acres of Kyle Dill's corn crop.
There was water everywhere, and water was coming up to the point we're at right now across these oil field roads, and I've never seen water like this before, but everything was starting to drain off. And it wasn't until a day or two later we started noticing the water wasn't going anywhere, and Wallace Lake in Shreveport, it started to build up, and the water started coming over the dam into Wallace Bayou and backed up Bayou Pierre. And that's the result of what you see here. This water here has nowhere to go to right now. It's going to hurt us financially. It's going to hurt. It's be really hard to spring to get everything in the ground, but good Lord's going to give us a chance to get it back in the ground, and we'll survive.
Dill says the only thing he can do now is wait for the water to recede so that he can assess the damage and start again and replant his corn. After 7 feet of water inundated homes and farms in Washington and Tangipahoa parishes, one rancher near Franklinton says he now has to replace more than a mile of fence swept up by flash flooding. As TWILA's AJ Sabine shows us, almost 100 head of cattle were nearly lost to the flood.
This debris-filled fence speaks for itself. However, the images captured by cattle rancher Clint Galliano tell a dramatically different story as more than 7 feet of water filled a grazing valley on his ranch in Tangipahoa Parish. The flood ripped up more than a mile of fencing and nearly drowned his cattle. Galliano says he still hasn't assessed all of the damage.
It's gone. I mean, you know, people don't think water's as strong as it is. It ripped all of our T-post up out of the ground. It ripped the wooden post with cement up out of the ground, and it moved fences halfway across fields.
In nearby Franklinton, you can still see debris-filled trees along the Bogachita River. NRCS District Conservationist Jeffrey Epps couldn't make it into work at the height of the storm. He says the Emergency Watershed Program can restore farmlands impacted by the flood.
A few landowners have come in, have called. One landowner in particular has had a pond blowout just due to the amount of rain. The dam just ended up blowing out, and it couldn't support the amount of water in that short period of time. Some of the other issues that we may be dealing with will probably be washouts and pastures.
Galliano explains that it could take several days for this land to be restored to drivable conditions. He says Mother Nature spared his operation the worst.
I know we've had neighbors up the road that still can't find cattle, that have lost their houses. They've lost everything. So, as bad as it was here, we are blessed that it wasn't any worse.
Galliano says his operation fared better than most. Some cattle ranchers in the area still do not have all of their animals accounted for. The loss of infrastructure to flood water has devastated many farmers, ranchers, and residents of Tangipahoa and Washington parishes. Well, during this historic flood, social media was a vital tool to help people share information, document the damage, and recruit help to assist those in need. News and weather outlets used Facebook and Twitter to update school and business closures, forecast the path of the storm, and warn residents of the danger of imminent flooding. Dramatic images and video emerged on social media to document the crisis. With the help of drones and smartphones, people posted photos and videos of the flood damage in their area. Houston Bass posted this drone footage on Facebook where you get a bird's eye view of how much water is covering the city of Monroe. On the ground, you can see fish swimming in the streets of ULM's campus. Thanks to Colin Landry for sharing this video with us. As floodwater inundated neighborhoods and forced residents out of their homes, churches, schools, and other organizations took to social media to help their neighbors in need. Churches in West Monroe mobilized emergency response teams to deliver sandbags, provide meals, donate supplies, and help with the cleanup effort after the water recedes. The West Washita High School baseball team spent a day filling sandbags at the Ike Hamilton Expo Center to deliver to flooded neighborhoods. Some people even posted photos of beds and baby furniture to donate to local families who lost their home in the flood. When the rain finally stopped on Sunday, photos of rainbows and sunny skies filled the newsfeed as people seemed to find hope after the storm. Through this disaster, social media truly showcased the power of good deeds and unity in these local communities. It was refreshing for once to see people band together and help others who were suffering in their area. And Avery, this is just another example of how social media can really be a powerful tool to help people during a disaster just like this one.
It certainly keeps people connected. Thanks, Kristen. I hope all of that water in Landon's field drains soon. You just heard Kristen mention about people helping each other through a disaster. That's exactly what's going on with the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation Livestock Committee's hay clearinghouse. With so many cattle displaced by the flood and grazing land covered by water, ranchers are going to need something to feed their cattle for quite a while. That's because once the grass is covered by water, it dies and takes some time to grow back. Also, barns flooded, which means the hay stored in those barns is destroyed. That's why the Louisiana Farm Bureau's Livestock Committee is asking ranchers who have extra hay to donate it to those ranchers who either had to move their cattle to escape floodwaters or who will not have viable grazing lands because of the flood. So far, ranchers in parts of the state not affected by the flood have donated about 1,700 round bales of hay, 250 square bales of hay, and offered up 200 acres of ryegrass for grazing. All of that came about after the Farm Bureau announced the program on social media. So, if you would like to donate hay or if you're in need of hay, visit our website at twilatv.org and you'll find a link to the LFBF Hay Clearinghouse. Well, as you saw earlier in the show, corn farmers are among the hardest hit by the flood of 2016. LSU Ag Center corn specialist Dan Fromme says corn farmers could stand to lose about $240 an acre in seed and fertilizer alone, all because of the flood. However, that's not the only problem corn farmers face. The window for planting is rapidly closing, so every day the field is too wet to plant is another day closer to the deadline. Fromme says that will likely shift many of Louisiana's corn acres to either soybeans or cotton. Another factor is that corn farmers may not be able to get the seed they want to replant, even if the water is gone.
A lot of seed has been booked, and it will be hard getting seed to replant. If you do get the seed to replant, it may not be the corn hybrid that you want. It may be your third or fourth pick, that you'd like to plant this year.
Fromme says if farmers cannot get the corn variety that works best on their land, it will impact yields, which impacts their bottom line. And speaking of the bottom line, later on in his bottom line segment, TWILA's Neil Melanson will show us the economic impact of this flood so far. And I can tell you, corn is one of the hardest hit. Still to come on TWILA, talk of trade with Cuba heats up in Louisiana with a high-level USDA visit. But first, a quick look at what's going on at the state capitol. Next. One session ends and another begins. The 2016 regular Louisiana legislative session is underway. This immediately follows the special legislative session where lawmakers were charged with solving the state's budget shortfalls. Despite passing Governor John Bel Edwards' clean penny 1-cent sales tax and making several other cuts, a report released this week shows the state is still short $70 million for the current fiscal year and still $750 million short for the next. The budget shortfall for the current fiscal year means there will be massive cuts to higher education and health services between now and June 30th. Because this is an even-numbered year, the legislature cannot take up revenue-generating bills during this regular session. No word yet on exactly what that will mean for the LSU and Southern Ag Centers. Political experts believe Governor Edwards could call a second special session following the conclusion of the regular session on June 6th. Louisiana agriculture and business leaders stand ready to pounce on the Cuban commodity market as relations between the island nation and the United States continue to thaw. USDA Undersecretary for Farm and Foreign Agricultural Service Michael Skuse visited with industry leaders in Baton Rouge for a roundtable discussion on trade with Cuba. Business and ag leaders, such as Louisiana Farm Bureau President Ronnie Anderson, met with Secretary Skuse to make the case for increased access to Cuba. Louisiana Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry Dr. Mike Strain noted the close proximity to the island nation as a strong selling point in marketing Louisiana commodities to the Cuban people. However, some business leaders noted that reparations owed to the United States by the Cuban government could stand in the way of renewed trade relations. Once Louisiana's #1 trade partner, rice industry leaders described Cuba as the holy grail as a marketplace for Louisiana rice. While everyone at the meeting revealed their enthusiasm to normalize trade relations with Cuba, Secretary Skuse says Congress has the power to get rice and other Louisiana commodities into Cuba.
Congress can make the changes and we can ship Louisiana rice down there this year. So, I mean, those barriers can come down and it's up to Congress to bring those barriers down so that we can ship rice from Louisiana to Cuba. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to, but we're doing everything in our power to find ways that we can ship U.S. product to Cuba, looking at ways that maybe we can use some of the checkoff funds to do promotion programs in Cuba. We're looking at our ability to do that. But we're prohibited from using our program, market promotion programs at USDA, as well as our credit programs at USDA. But we need to break down the barriers, and once those barriers are breaking down, we can start shipping great Louisiana rice, cotton, corn, soybeans to Cuba.
We heard all the obstacles that are there, you know, the funding of being able to pay for the rice and how to move it and what embargoes are still there and settlements of the property and stuff like that. But I think there's some real opportunities. That door is opening. And I think for our rice producers, it is a great opportunity. And while we were doing the discussion, well, Undersecretary Skuse and I have been great friends for a long time. I think that gives us an opportunity to get his ear and get into his office. In fact, he and I talked about on my next trip to Washington to come by and visit with him and you know, talk about a lot of things, and this being one of them. He's very knowledgeable, and he's a great friend to have in that position.
Business leaders identified Cuba's lack of access to credit as a substantial hurdle that must be overcome before normalized trade can begin. More than 20 business and agricultural leaders attended the meeting with Undersecretary Skuse. While farmers are looking for a gateway into the Cuban market, they already have a gateway to conservation in their own homes. At this year's Commodity Classic in New Orleans, the Natural Resources Conservation Service was really pushing its client gateway. The NRCS state conservationist Kevin Norton says it's the engine that runs the Farm Service Agency's FSA Plus online portal. Started in early 2015, the NRCS Client Gateway is a convenient tool for farmers and ranchers.
And they get a chance to look at their conservation plan. They begin to request assistance. We then come out to the field and work with them as we're implementing their contracts, their agreements, those kinds of things. We get their payments ready. Then at the convenience of their own home, you know, after they've got off the combine after a long day of work, they need to get a payment cleaned up and cleared so that they can get their funding. They can do it in the convenience right there at their home.
To learn more about the NRCS Client Gateway, either visit your local NRCS office or go to our website at twilatv.org. Still to come on TWILA, we get the bottom line on the economic impact of the flood of 2016. Stay with us. As we've seen, this flood event has been as disastrous as it has been sudden, especially given the fact it was not a hurricane. Now, the final tally on just how bad agriculture got hit is not going to be known for a while, but is being tabulated as we speak. Joining us from Monterey, Louisiana for this week's Bottom Line is TWILA's Neil Melanson. And Neil, I know there are some early estimates out there, but I know it's still way too soon to know just how much damage was done.
Avery, I don't want to use the word lucky with an event like this because it's just unfortunate for so many. Outside of agriculture damage, farmers are people too, and many lost their homes and personal property. That said, the timing of this flood and rain prevented a lot more damage. Many farmers had only begun to plant corn, and other crops like soybeans aren't ready to go this time of year, this early in March. Farmers had some flexibility and held off planting when they knew the storm was coming. Still, many corn acres were already in the ground. Initial estimates from the LSU Ag Center put the overall damage at $5 million, and according to economist Dr. Kurt Guidry, corn will account for half that total.
Based on some very, very preliminary numbers, we could have as many as about 30,000 acres of corn already planted by the time the storms came. Certainly not all of those acres are going to have the full impact of the flooding and the weather events. But you know, when we're looking at right now, let's say roughly about 18,000 acres of those 30,000 that could have some potential for replanting. So you're looking at well over $2.5 million for those 18,000 acres that would have to go back in and replant.
The bottom line is simply that until these floodwaters recede, we're just not going to know how much damage has been done. We do know that there's little damages done to farmers, even if they don't face the severe ramifications that they faced last year. Corn being replanted, cattle being evacuated and then having to be rounded up, fences that are down, fields that have to be pumped. All of these are expenditures that farmers are going to have to face. Now, all show long, you've heard this lapping sound like waves. Well, it is waves. It's just not on a lake. This is Landon White's field, and I know the sun is not really in the right place for it, but these are the remnants of the storm, the wind driving the water up even 6 to 8 inches, as little as that is. It's been driven by this wind and it's covering these fields as far as the eye can see. And it's as far as we can see that this water will stay on these fields for the time being, and that's adding to the time delayed for planting as well as expenditures if they have to pump all of this water. And Kristen, one big difference we see from this year versus last, even if the damage is not as severe, the prices for these commodities are nowhere near as good.
That's true, and it sounds like it's creating the perfect storm for a bad year for farmers. We're hoping that that's not the case, but if you look at the forecast for the next 12 to 15 days, we have 2 days of sun and the rest has rain in it. So if these fields, the water doesn't, if it never leaves,
they never get planted.
Exactly, and that's the window for planting corn is closing quickly, and so
soybeans are coming up.
That's very, very true. Neil Melanson, thanks. Well, back to you in the studio, Avery. This is a story that is not going to end today or here. This is one that we're going to be covering for the next few weeks.
Sadly, we will. Thank you, Kristen and Neil, for your reports. I want to take a little moment of personal privilege to thank the TWILA team. Kristen, Carl, AJ, and Neil, thank you for stepping up to bring us these stories. Oftentimes in disasters like this, farmers, ranchers, and timber owners are forgotten because they're not the ones calling out for help. They're not the ones you see on the evening news being rescued from their homes. They're the ones taking care of themselves, their livestock, and their rural neighbors. And that's why This Week in Louisiana Agriculture is here, to tell the story you're not going to see on any cable news network or the evening news in a big city. So to you, our viewer, thank you for caring enough about where your food, clothing, and shelter come from enough to watch this show and support the farmers and ranchers who allow us to live the lives we do every day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, for all of us here at TWILA, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again right here next week.